This is the Pet Buzz.
This is the Pet Buzz.
And here's the Dynamic Pet Duo.
Okay, so who's a good boy? Who's a that high-pitched voice and exaggerated emotion when interacting with a dog will get you a long way, scientists say. So joining us to talk about the way we speak to our dog friends is Dr. Alex Benjamin, Associate Lecturer, Department of Psychology at the University of York. Welcome to the Pet Buzz.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So Dr. Benjamin, what is dog speak or dog-directed speech, and how can it help us strengthen our relationships with our dogs?
So dog-directed speech is the type of speech that we use when we talk to our dogs. So you might have heard people saying, "Oh, you're such a good boy. Would you like to go for a walk?" And that kind of high-pitched, exciting, emotional sound that we tend to use when we talk to dogs is very, it contrasts really nicely with the type of speech that I'm using with you right now, which is adult-directed speech, which is a lot more kind of boring and monotone. So we use this type of speech with our dogs. We think that it helps them to pay attention to us. And we've also shown in our recent experiment that it also helps to facilitate social bonding with humans as well.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. So is dog-directed speech similar to infant-directed speech, and do they have the same benefits as a result?
So infant-directed speech is obviously the type of speech that we use with babies. And this also has similarities with dog-directed speech in that it tends to have high pitch. It tends to be very sort of moderated. So you tend to go high and low with the pitch, as well as it being highly emotional. And now we know from lots of previous research that infant-directed speech is really important for helping our babies to learn language. So it exaggerates the native vowel sounds of their language to help them to learn how to talk. It's also important for identifying appropriate social partners, so it helps babies to bond with the mother, the father, the extended family, and caregivers. We think that dog-directed speech is important for the social aspect, but obviously we're not trying to teach our dogs to learn language, although I think that would be pretty cool.
Yeah, I always find when you see a baby and you go, oh, like, oh, you rub his belly and all of a sudden the baby smiles. I think it's kind of similar when you talk to it's like, mommy loves you, mommy loves you. I used to tell my bird that and my dogs that, and they get all excited and their butt wiggles. Okay, so I understand what you're saying. And I see the benefits. I just feel the love, emulating. So not such a long time ago, you conducted a study about dog-directed speech. Tell us about it and how was it different from previous research?
So some previous studies had done some experiments where they'd played dog-directed speech, so that silly voice, and adult-directed speech back to puppies and adult dogs. And they found that puppies paid more attention to dog-directed speech, but adult dogs didn't. But in these experiments, they had the sounds coming from speakers, and there was no person there who could actually be interacting with the dog. So in our experiments, we decided to see if this was still the case if we had a more natural experiment where we had the individuals who were sitting in front of the dogs, they had the speakers on their laps, and it sounded a lot more like the speech was actually coming from the people. And we found that when this was the case and there were people for the dogs to interact with, that dogs of lots of different ages paid more attention to the person using dog-directed speech than the person using adult-directed speech. And also at the end of the experiment, when we let the dogs off the lead, the dogs chose to spend more time with the person who had previously been using dog-directed speech. So it seemed like not only did this type of speech grab their attention, but it also made them want to play with them or bond with them more than boring old adult-directed speech.
Cool. I mean, I think that's so great because you see, I guess from your research, you see the love, you feel it, right? So, I mean, how can pet owners benefit from this information?
So I think it's a good excuse for pet owners who already use dog-directed speech to not perhaps feel so silly if they're somebody who's been called out before for talking to their dogs as if they're babies. Actually, now this gives you a good excuse for keeping on doing that and ignoring all the people that say that it's just a bit silly, because it does seem to have some function with our pets. I think it's also worth mentioning here, however, that there are lots of ways that we bond with our animals. It's not just in the way that we talk to them. So if you are somebody who uses adult-directed speech with your dogs and doesn't tend to use those silly voices, that doesn't mean that your dog doesn't love you. We bond with our pets in lots of different ways, including taking them for walks, playing with them, giving them affection in lots of different ways. So we think that this is particularly useful for when bonding with an unfamiliar dog. So if you have a rescue dog, or if your dog is going to the vet perhaps and they're particularly worried about going to the vet, this type of speech might give the dog a signal that you're not a risk to them, or you're not a danger, or that you're there to comfort them. So this type of speech might be useful when you get a new dog to your house, or when your dog's in an unfamiliar environment.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because so many people here in the United States, I don't know about the UK, have literally in the last year and a half adopted dogs as companions during this COVID pandemic when they've been isolated alone. And because a lot of the dogs aren't puppies, there are a lot of older dogs. I think that it can be very useful when you're bonding with that dog once you bring him home. As the same, I mean, I'm wondering if it's true with cats, but at least with dogs, people need to kind of continuously bond with these new pets they're bringing home, because, and it's great because they have the opportunity now because they have so much more time, because so many people are either not working or more people are working from home. Now, do you think should you encourage children to engage in dog-directed speech when talking with a new pet?
So children are actually particularly good at dog-directed speech or pet-directed speech, and they're also very good at talking to other children. So children will naturally perform infant and dog-directed speech when talking to animals. So I don't think that there's much difference. I haven't done the research specifically on that, but I would imagine that the same things are true with children and dog-directed speech. I guess a caveat to say there is that children should always be supervised when dealing with an animal, particularly an unfamiliar animal. We don't want to be encouraging children to go up to strange dogs in the street, or dogs that are perhaps not going to be friendly to them, and thinking that dog-directed speech is going to be a magic way of making friends with all animals. That's definitely not going to be the case. So I think it definitely has its place. If you have a new puppy in the family or a new rescue dog and you want your children to bond with them, one of the ways that they could do that is through supervised activities where they are taught to use this soft puppy appropriate or dog appropriate voice. Bearing in mind that children can tend to be very exciting for dogs. So I think another thing to bear in mind is that they don't want to be doing too much squealing or too much high-pitched, excited noises, because that can encourage the dog to get a little bit overexcited sometimes.
And I think it's key that you mentioned supervision, because probably about 2 months ago, we had a doctor on who had done some research, and they had deemed that there had been more dog bites with children during the pandemic than in the past 10 years. Just internally in the home, not young. Here in the United States, in May, the U.S. Post Office, I don't want to say celebrates, but they have an awareness day about, National Dog Bite Day, where because mail carriers get bit a lot. And usually they target communities so that, generally the statistic is boys between the ages of 10 and 12 get bitten generally when they're outside playing with dogs. But this study was really interesting because it talked about kids in the home being bitten by dogs, and we see more of that happening. But that's also because we are home more. The dog is not sleeping 18 hours a day. He's interacting with the family. So I guess I just wanted to make that point. But what's next? What's the next big, are you going to do more related to dog-directed speech study, or are you going to do something totally different?
So we've got a couple of things in the work. I think there's still lots of things to learn about dog-directed speech and how it interacts with other variables. So, for example, something that we've been looking at recently is whether dogs are sensitive to eye contact in the way that humans will use eye contact to decide whether that person is trying to talk to them or not. So if you're sitting on a train, for example, if somebody says hello and they're looking at you, then you might think that they're trying to talk with you. But actually, if they're listening on their headphones and they're talking to someone on the phone, that can be very confusing, right? So eye gaze and eye contact with other humans is one of the things that we use to understand whether somebody is trying to talk to us. And so we've been recently looking into whether dogs use similar head direction or eye gaze cues to find out whether somebody is talking to them or not. So if we use dog-directed speech, but we're facing somewhere else, or our heads are down, or we're not actually looking at the dog, whether they pay attention to that. So that's something interesting that we're doing next.
That's great. Well, my pretty handsome babies, I see you in the background. They're actually sitting in the window. So my handsome babies, I'm going to take you for a little walkie. Yes, we're going to go for a little walk this afternoon. But what about you guys? I mean, what are you going to do? We are so happy that Dr. Alex Benjamin can join us and discuss the impact of dog-directed speech and its benefits. I have to tell you, Dr. Alex, it just seems like they're working now. All of a sudden, they turned around and looked at me. So is the one down by my feet. So I am so happy that you were able to join us and share. And I think this is really important research. We definitely going to follow up with you. We want to have you back. Well, anyway, to learn more about that's Dr. Alex Benjamin and her research, visit researchgate.net. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Pet Buzz.